Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steven with Freeze Peach Gaming. This is where I talk about pop culture, politics, and where the two collide. Please consider giving me a comment, a like, subscribe, and sharing the channel down below. I would greatly appreciate it, as it would help me to gain more reach, which I desperately need right now. Today, we're going to talk about an interesting collision between pop culture and politics, and it is the conversations that have been happening between TheQuartering and Lauren S. Hissrich, who is a writer for The Witcher. On Netflix. So if you don't know who TheQuartering is and you're watching my channel, that's interesting, but he is a center-right, I would say in my opinion, a center-right pop culture commentator on YouTube. I like his stuff. I've been watching him for a few years, ever since the Sprankles controversy happened years ago when he was still on Unsleeved Media. So I'll admit that I am probably biased towards him in this. And on the other side, we have Lauren S. Hissrich, a writer for The Witcher on Netflix. She is a more left-wing person, which she openly admits to. She's put her politics out there pretty plain and clear on the internet. And initially there was a bit of a back and forth going on between them that wasn't mean or anything, essentially, but they were sort of ribbing each other back and forth, and that eventually turned to sort of lower end mockery, and eventually they've actually started having a really good conversation going between them, on mostly on Twitter. But it's actually been really nice to watch two people with opposing views who are able to talk to each other, and to give Lauren credit, she has actually been sort of weeding through. She has a lot of people on her side of the aisle, on the left-wing side of the aisle, who are telling her a lot of things about TheQuartering, about how he's a misogynist and he hates LGBTQ, LMNOP people, and all of this stuff. And she has basically answered with, well, you know what, I'll ask him about this. And she has been asking him about, all sorts of things in a very good faith and honest manner. And she allows him to respond in kind, and she doesn't take him out of context. And it's overall been a really nice conversation going between the two of them. It's gotten to the point where now they are sending videos back and forth on Twitter to each other. And Jeremy posed this question yesterday. He wanted to ask her about some of the what we perceive as identity politics being pushed into Netflix shows like The Witcher, but I'll allow Jeremy to ask the question himself.
All right, Lauren, you're an industry insider, and I got a spicy one for you on a Friday. If you say you're coming to me in good faith, and I believe you, I think people will be interested to hear your reply on this. So it's a common meme about Netflix that the Netflix adaptation will often race swap or gender swap or sexual orientation swap existing characters. The narrative in my world is that this is done to check boxes, to talk about how stunning and brave people are.
To be fair to people who do propagate that sort of opinion, I mean, I've seen it myself going on with a lot of Netflix shows. It's not a difficult conclusion to come to.
Question is, as is many, why do you think Hollywood opts to change existing established characters to reach to offer more diversity, as opposed to write new and interesting characters that are already diverse? I look forward to your reply.
So this is a question that's actually come up a lot in particularly center-right, or just freedom-oriented, as we would like to call ourselves, spaces of people who are concerned with pop culture, and what we see as the ever-encroaching spread of identity politics into pop culture, and it's become particularly prevalent in fantasy. Now, fantasy, especially modern fantasy, has deep roots into European, particularly Western European ideas, mostly stemming from the popularity of J.R.R. Tolkien. Being a Western European man himself, he wrote an England-centric, not just, England, but also the Celtic countries, Ireland and Scotland, but he wrote a very English-centric fantasy with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and that grew in popularity a great deal, particularly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and has sort of, that has become the baseline for modern fantasy. And so that's why we see a lot of Western European ideals in modern fantasy. And a lot of people are concerned that identity politics is starting to take over traditional modern fantasy and that it's going to do harm to it rather than make it better. But I'll have some more thoughts on that after we listen to Lauren's response. And by the way, I really like what she says at the top of her comment here. If you can see that, good faith is scary. I think particularly from someone who is entrenched on the left side, it probably is scary to have a good faith conversation because a lot of people on your own side are going to take good faith out of context and they're going to use it against you because they don't want to have a good faith conversation, because they don't want to reach across the aisle and try to have a conversation with these people who think differently than you in an attempt to try and change their minds, which Lauren has actually openly said in a tweet that it is her plan, that she is reaching across the aisle and talking to people because she wants to try and change ideas of people who think differently than her. And that's fine. That's our intent of reaching across the aisle to her, or I certainly would imagine that's Jeremy's attempt in reaching across the aisle to her and having a conversation with her, is that hopefully he can change her mind and she's hoping to change his mind. And this is how we can have just we can just have a good faith discourse between people who we disagree with. But let's listen to Lauren's response.
This is super weird. I've never recorded myself like this, but I'm just going to jump in. Thanks for the question. I cannot pretend to speak for all of Hollywood, and I'm going to speak specifically just to my experience because I am writing an adaptation. It's what I was hired to do. And I think my experience specifically is that I'm a woman, and I am a fan of fantasy. And for years, I had a lot of trouble finding myself in fantasy, and I realized that not all women may feel the same, but that's just my experience. I was looking for characters that were incredibly well-rounded, imperfect, had layers, and were as important as their counterparts. And once I started thinking about that, when I sold The Witcher, I started thinking about all of the other people who might not see themselves represented in fantasy either. Because let's be honest, fantasy has often been told through a white male perspective. And it's an important perspective, but it's not the only one.
So to cut in a little bit here, I think part of the reason why, there's the common perception that fantasy is told from a white male perspective is because for a long time, and even I would say now, the audience for fantasy has been white males. That is the predominant audience that actually consumes this content. And, it kind of helps to have a similar perspective to the audience that you're trying to gain. Now, she actually has a good response to that here in a second.
And it's something that I spoke to Sapkowski about very early when I started the adaptation. Obviously, it's a book that was written at a certain time. It was written by a Polish author. And I had a feeling that most people imagine these characters to be white only. And was that important to the stories that we were telling? And the resounding answer was no. It was actually much more important to tell a story that could resonate with a larger population of the world. So no, I've never been given a quota.
And that's kind of the answer to my criticism there, is that and I can understand that response, at least, is that they're trying to grab the widest audience possible. And that's often what the reasoning is. What I think the actual reasoning behind a lot of the what we could call blackwashing, gay washing, what have you, washing of traditionally white characters. I imagine a lot of it, especially from the studio executives, maybe not the identity politics-driven people who are creating a lot of these things at a lower level. I think a lot of them are actually essentially brainwashed identity politics, single-sided, single-minded people, the kind of people who are attacking Lauren for having a good conversation with TheQuartering. But I do believe it's particularly from the studio side of things, the higher-up executives. They are trying to reach wider audiences. The problem is when you try to engender everybody, you wind up engendering nobody, because it's very difficult to have this really good, really well-balanced system of things, not system, but a creation of something, when it is based on pre-existing works. When I think Carrie Smith put it the best, that a lot of times people view identity in lieu of character, and identity is a poor supplement for character. So we see a lot of these characters, they basically just make them black and expect audiences to clap because they made a character black, and that's just never going to work. It has to be a good, strong, well-rounded character, which at least she said that was their attempt in going for in here. I have some disagreements with that, but we'll get into that. Let her finish her point.
I've never seen boxes to tick. I am trying to tell stories where other people who may have had my experience can also find themselves in The Witcher. And that includes making characters have different skin colors than perhaps fans imagined. Do I believe it's the right thing? I do. I really do. I think that this is a global show, that I have an opportunity to bring it to not just a couple million people, but hundreds of millions of people. And I have gotten far more responses from people who were grateful that they could actually respond to this story for the first time. Do I know that not everyone's happy with it? Yeah. But I still feel really strongly that it's the right decision for the story that we're telling.
So, credit where credit is due. That is an honest, good faith response that she made there. And I know a lot of people are probably thinking that she is only pretending to be in good faith, but in an attempt to create a better discourse between people on the left and the right, I think that we really should take this at face value of being a good faith argument. So some of the things that I would disagree with on what she said there is that she is trying to, in changing character skin colors, that she is creating more representation with these characters. But I, at least from what I have heard from other people who are of a different skin color than myself, they don't have to necessarily see their physical characteristics represented on a character in order to see themselves represented in that. Just Some Guy talks about this a lot, in that they don't have to make Superman a black character for him to identify as someone like Superman. But also, I think she's completely missing out on the not just appropriation, but reappropriation that is going on with this. The Witcher, as she had said, is a particularly Polish story. And as someone who is of Polish descent, now I'm American, obviously. I'm not an actual Polak. I'm an American, but I am of Polish descent. And in my family, we've been pretty proud of our Polish descent over the years. Polish fantasy is a particularly niche genre. In fact, I would say it's probably less mainstream than black fantasy. So you are having to appropriate something that is even more niche and even less represented in order to create more representation in your view. I also believe that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of people who push identity politics. As I said before, identity is a poor replacement for character, and it really does feel to me, in my opinion, like a lot of the characters in the Witcher TV show are not they're not at all well-rounded characters, and they're just given a skin color to make them have a physical appearance representation rather than to have a character representation or a character trait representation that people can then identify with. I've talked about this before, but the 2013 Hannibal television show had a lot of race swapping and gender swapping, a whole lot of it. A bunch of the characters, if you read the book, they're basically all across the board a bunch of white men, and then you watch the TV show and it's a whole mixed bag. You've got Lawrence Fishburne as Jack Crawford. I can't remember the actress's name, but they turn Freddie Lounds into a woman who is a redhead. But the characters are still very well-rounded, and they're multidimensional and multifaceted, whereas in The Witcher, I feel like a lot of these characters have just had a race swap to make it convenient for them to say, look, we are trying to push forth representation. And I will take it at face value that she said she was not given checkboxes to put on there. I will believe her for that purpose. But it doesn't change the fact that, say, the guard for the Queen of Sintra, whose name flew right out of my head, is just a black guy because they wanted to push forth representation. And I think a lot of the issue also comes from people who do tend to be fans of fantasy tend to really dive into the nitty-gritty of how these things occurred. So they just put a single guy in a kingdom who is black when everyone else is white, we're going to question that. How did he get there? What happened? And I think it's actually believable that perhaps he could have, using Witcher lore coming from the video games, he could have come from a far-off land like Ophir, and he was taken in by these people, and he has worked his way up to being a captain of the guard. I think that's believable. But then we go to other places, and like the elves are all black for some reason, and we have other portions of society, particularly in the peasant portions of society, where they seem to have a very American-centric or American idealized melting pot going on. And that isn't particularly realistic when you are viewing this from a Polish medieval view. Because even if you did have, say, a 5% population of black people in a Polish medieval area living under feudalism, there would be one of two things would occur. One, either people would naturally segregate themselves because it's sort of natural for people to do that. They tend to want to congregate around other people who not only look like themselves, but think like themselves and have a similar origin to themselves. So say there was a group of refugees who came to this area from a far off land where they have darker skin, and perhaps they congregated toward themselves. But that also, especially in a feudal time, would create a lot of tension between the two populations, and they probably wouldn't be as friendly to each other. Either that would happen, or one side is going to breed out the other side, and they actually do become integrated, and they do become friendly to each other, and, they tend to intermarry and integrate in their society. If it's 95% white and 5% black, the black people are going to disappear in a few generations. I mean, look at a quarter black Garrett on Louder with Crowder in Friday Night Tights. He pretty much looks like a white guy with dark hair. And, I mean, I have a cousin who's half black, and he looks like he's mixed race. His daughter is a quarter black as well. She pretty much just looks white. So within 4 generations, you basically have the loss of the entire population of black people, and now you just have a more swarthy population of people, kind of like you see with the Sicilians. So that is something that I don't think they took into account when appropriating the traditionally Polish medieval fantasy work of The Witcher and trying to put more black people into it. But I think the real problem is that a lot of these characters aren't quite as well-rounded as she intended them to be. For instance, like Triss. I know a lot of people complain about her hair color, really, but the hair color is actually more closely related to what's in the show compared to the books, as compared to what you see in the video games. She really doesn't have red hair in the books. They very specifically state that she has chestnut-colored hair, which is a bit closer to what you see in the show. But at the same time, her character doesn't feel as well-rounded as I think it could be, and I feel like they used the fact that I believe to be a mixed-race woman as just an excuse to say we have representation in here now, and we're not going to have to worry about the character as much. I still think the ultimate character assassination that has happened in the show has been to Dandelion. In the show, he's just frankly annoying. He's this dandy, and I get it, it's in the name Dandelion, or they call him Jaskier, which is Polish for dandelion. But he's just kind of an annoying shithead, and I don't really like him that much. The songs are really catchy, and he has a couple of good moments throughout the show, but in the books, his character is so much stronger than in the shows. He's a modern-day philosopher. He's a traveling poet. He doesn't just follow Geralt around. He tends to meet back up with Geralt in random situations, and they actually became friends very quickly in the books. And he has a lot more to him, and in fact, he at times has a much better view of the human perspective than Geralt does, and he's able to see through and see identifying characteristics of people, not physical, but, emotional and personal characteristics of people, and he can really pinpoint a personality of a person just by looking at them and studying them very quickly. And I feel like that is completely lost on the character in the show, and he's mostly just there for comic relief. And I kind of don't like it, because he's really interesting in the books, kind of just fucking annoying in the show. But back to the original topic. I think that this conversation going on between Lauren S. Hissrich and Jeremy at TheQuartering is really important and a really good thing going on, and I really hope that some of the people who are trying to turn Lauren into being more vitriolic towards the quartering, probably so that they can push their own bullshit out there more. Like you see the Serfs is putting out a bunch of basically a bunch of bullshit about Jeremy at the quartering, about him being, hating of women and LGBTQ. And I think Lauren has done a really good job of weeding through I don't want to say they're outright lies, because I'm sure the Serfs believes that is the case. I think she's done a really good job of giving Jeremy the ability to combat these ideas that have been perpetuated about him from, left-wing partisan hacks who just want to push forth more vitriol so that they can get more clicks and take things out of context. That's basically the Serf's entire MO, is that he takes shit out of context and tries to write hit pieces about people. And I think she's done a really good job of letting Jeremy combat that in his own way, and by asking him openly and fairly about these claims that have been made about him. And I hope this conversation continues. I've really been enjoying seeing it going on, and I hope that people, particularly on her side, because I would like to believe that people on my side, the freedom-loving, free speech side of the aisle, are perfectly fine with people like Lauren saying what she has to say and combating our ideas and combating our questions and taking them on with good faith. I think that everyone on my side, if they aren't, they should. If they truly believe in what they claim to believe in, everyone should agree with her ability to do this. And not only that, we should defend her ability to do this. I just hope that people on her side can learn from her actions and allow the same thing, and allow for a free and open discourse of ideas to ensue. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I think about this situation. Please let me know what you think about this situation in the comments down below. Have a wonderful day, and never be afraid to speak your mind.